My husband walked out of the luxury boutique with a quick kiss to my cheek, whispering that he would pull the car around. I stood at the register, smiling like a fool, waiting to pay for his anniversary gift. Then my credit card declined, and my backup card declined. The cashier gave me a look of pure pity before the store manager stepped out from the back room. He did not ask for another payment method. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, please come with me to the security office right now." I am Megan, 33 years old, and until that exact second, I thought I had a perfectly normal, happy marriage. I work as a forensic accountant, spending my days investigating financial fraud for a massive corporate firm in Chicago. You would think someone whose entire career revolves around catching liars would spot the deception in her own home. But I missed it completely. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been blindsided by the people you trusted most. Let me take you back to that afternoon. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. Bradley, my handsome, charismatic 35-year-old husband, had been dropping hints about a specific $3,000 watch for months. I am usually very careful with money. It is a hazard of my profession. I track every penny balance, every ledger, and live well within my means. But yesterday, my mother Patricia had called me specifically to lecture me about my finances and my marriage. "Brad works so hard, Megan." She had sighed over the phone, her tone dripping with that familiar disappointment she always reserved for me. "Make sure you treat him right for your anniversary. You do not have children to pay for, so stop being so stingy. Your sister Courtney is pregnant and building her brand, so she has an excuse to be tight on cash. You do not. Buy the man a nice gift." Oh. My older sister Courtney was 36 and the undisputed golden child of our family. She called herself a lifestyle entrepreneur, though I had never actually seen her turn a profit. She was married to Trevon, a 38-year-old African-American man who styled himself as a high-rolling crypto and real estate broker. Trayvon constantly belittled my corporate job, calling me a slave to the system, while boasting about his imaginary digital fortunes. My parents adored them. They worshipped Trayvon's flashy suits and Courtney's designer bags, constantly demanding that I share my boring corporate salary to help fund their lavish lifestyle. So there I was, standing in the gleaming, immaculate showroom of a high-end Cartier boutique, trying to prove my mother wrong, trying to prove I was a good, generous wife. Bradley had just pressed a warm kiss to my cheek. "Just getting the car, babe." He smiled, his perfect teeth flashing under the crystal chandeliers. "See you out front." I watched him stroll out the glass doors, feeling a rush of affection. I turned back to the cashier and handed over my premium credit card. She swiped it. The machine beeped a sharp, unpleasant tone. "Declined." I laughed nervously, feeling a prickle of heat on the back of my neck. I told her to run it again, assuming it was a fraud alert. My bank often flagged unusually large purchases. The cashier swiped it a second time, declined again. The polite smile on her face faltered. I quickly dug into my purse and pulled out my backup credit card, the one I kept strictly for emergencies. It had a zero balance and a massive limit. I handed it over my palms, starting to sweat. The cashier ran it. Another loud beep. Declined. The heat rushed straight to my cheeks. A woman standing behind me in line shifted her weight and sighed heavily. The cashier offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile that felt worse than a slap to the face. "Is there another card you would like to try, ma'am?" she asked, her voice hushed clearly, trying to spare my pride. I pulled out my phone, frantically opening my banking app to see what was wrong. The screen loaded, but before I could read the numbers, a tall man in a tailored suit stepped out from the back hallway. His name tag identified him as Diego, the store manager. He walked directly toward the register. He did not ask if I had another card. He did not offer to call my bank. He gestured for the cashier to step back, then looked at me with an expression that was entirely too serious for a simple card error. "Ma'am, please come with me to the security office right now." I stared at him. "The security office?" I stammered. "I just need to call my bank. It is probably a security hold." Diego shook his head, his voice dropping so the other wealthy patrons would not hear. This is not about your card declining. Please follow me. My legs felt like lead. The humiliation of the declined cards was instantly replaced by a cold, sharp dread. My mind raced. Had my identity been stolen? As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how fast financial ruin could happen. I spent my days tracing ghost accounts and untangling webs of deceit for multi-million-dollar corporations. I audited ledgers, tracked down missing funds, and put white-collar criminals in jail. Yet walking down that narrow carpeted hallway behind the store manager, I felt completely helpless. We entered a small, windowless room filled with monitors displaying various angles of the boutique and the parking lot outside. Diego closed the door behind us, shutting out the soft classical music playing on the sales floor. He pointed to one of the screens. It showed the side parking lot where Bradley had supposedly gone to get our car. But Bradley was not walking toward our sedan. He was standing next to a sleek black luxury SUV, and he was not alone. Standing right in front of my husband was my older sister, Courtney. She was supposed to be resting at home for her pregnancy. On the screen, Bradley reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a slender velvet box, flipped it open, and lifted out a piece of jewelry that caught the harsh glare of the parking lot lights. It was a diamond necklace. Not just any necklace, but a specific, breathtaking piece I had seen in the display case earlier. Bradley stepped closer to my sister. He unclasped the necklace and carefully fastened it around Courtney's neck. Then right there in broad daylight, my husband pulled my sister in for a deep, passionate kiss. I stopped breathing. The air left my lungs completely. I reached out and gripped the edge of the security desk to keep from collapsing. Diego turned to me, his eyes full of pity. "I am so sorry," he said softly. "I did not bring you back here just to show you that." He picked up a piece of paper from his desk and slid it toward me. It was a credit application form. "He did not just buy that necklace for her," Diego explained. "The necklace cost $45,000. He financed it 20 minutes ago, and he used your social security number as the primary guarantor." The words hit me like a physical strike. My husband was not just cheating on me with my own sister, he was committing identity fraud. My hands shook violently as I picked up my phone again. I bypassed my regular banking app and logged directly into my secure credit bureau portal, a habit from my line of work. I braced myself to see a $45,000 hit on my credit score. The portal loaded. But the number staring back at me was not 45,000. The screen flashed a glowing red alert. I was currently carrying $450,000 in active defaulted corporate debt across 3 separate business loans I had never signed for. $450,000. I stared at the glowing red digits on my phone screen until my vision began to blur. As a forensic accountant, I track missing millions for massive corporate clients every single day. I know what human error looks like. I know what a banking glitch looks like. This was neither. This was a calculated and systematic financial slaughter. Diego, the store manager, gently touched my elbow. He asked if I needed him to call the police. I shook my head slowly. The local police handles stolen televisions and petty retail theft. What I was looking at on my screen was a federal crime. I looked at Diego and asked him for a physical copy of the credit application Bradley had just signed. Diego hesitated for a moment, mentioning company policy, but he looked at my pale face and the tears I absolutely refused to shed. He walked over to the security printer and handed me the document. I saw my forged signature at the bottom. The ink was barely dry. I thanked him and walked out of the Cartier boutique. The crisp Chicago air hit my face, but I felt completely numb. I walked right past the exact parking spot where my husband had just kissed my pregnant sister. I got into my car and locked the heavy doors. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text from Bradley. He said he was so sorry, but he got an emergency call from work and had to leave the mall immediately. He told me to take a rideshare home and that he loved me so much. I stared at the text message. He loved me. He loved me so much that he bankrupted me and bedded my sister in the exact same hour. Most women would call their best friend crying. Most women would scream or throw their phone against the dashboard. I did none of those things. I opened my work laptop right there in the driver's seat. I connected to my mobile hotspot and bypassed the standard consumer credit portals, diving straight into the deep public records databases I used for my corporate investigations. I pulled my comprehensive credit history. It was not a simple summary. It was a dense 15-page document detailing 3 separate corporate loans originating from a commercial bank in Delaware. They were taken out under holding companies I had never heard of, but I recognized the digital footprint instantly. This was not just Bradley. Bradley was a mid-level sales manager who could barely balance our household checking account. He did not have the brains or the connections to structure untraceable corporate shell companies, but my brother-in-law Trevon did. Every Sunday evening, my parents hosted a lavish family dinner at their sprawling estate in the suburbs. It was a mandatory weekly event where my mother Patricia could show off her fine china and praise my sister Courtney for simply existing. I started the car engine. I was not going back to my empty house. I was going to dinner. During the 40-minute drive to the suburbs, my mind coldly catalogued every slight, every backhanded compliment, every single time my family had demanded I accommodate Courtney. I thought about last Thanksgiving when Trevin arrived in a brand new Porsche. He had stood in my kitchen, swirling a glass of my expensive wine, and mocked my accounting career. He called me a corporate drone who lacked the vision to build real generational wealth. My parents had nodded in agreement, praising his entrepreneurial spirit. Now I knew exactly how he funded that spirit. He funded it with my identity. I pulled up to my parents' house. Bradley's sedan was already in the driveway, parked neatly next to Trayvon's flashy Porsche. I grabbed the 15-page credit report from my passenger seat. The paper was still warm from my portable printer. I did not bother knocking on the front door. I pushed the heavy oak open and walked straight down the hallway toward the sound of laughter. The dining room was a picture of suburban perfection. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the overhead chandelier. A massive roasted turkey sat in the center of the long table. My father, Richard, was pouring an expensive red wine. My mother, Patricia, was passing a porcelain bowl of truffle mashed potatoes. And there, sitting right next to my husband, was my sister, Courtney. Around her neck, resting perfectly against the fabric of her maternity dress, was the $45,000 diamond necklace Bradley had just bought her. My necklace. My debt. Everyone stopped talking when I entered the room. Bradley looked up, his face dropping slightly before he recovered with a forced, charming smile. He said he was glad I made it and asked how my ride home was. I did not answer him. I walked directly to the head of the table. The silence in the room became incredibly suffocating. I lifted the thick stack of papers and slammed the 15-page credit report down onto the fine china plates. The heavy thud rattled the expensive silverware. Courtney gasped loudly, clutching the new diamond necklace as if I were about to rip it off her throat. My mother, Patricia, let out a dramatic sigh and rolled her eyes. She slammed her wine glass down onto the table. "Megan, really," she scolded. "Your sister is pregnant and exhausted. Do not ruin her mood with your corporate spreadsheets. Can you not leave your boring job at the office for one single night?" I completely ignored my mother. I kept my eyes locked on my father, Richard, who was sitting comfortably at the head of the table. I pointed to the papers. I said, "I want an explanation for the $450,000 in defaulted corporate debt registered to my Social Security number. I want an explanation for the Delaware shell companies. And I want to know why my husband just financed a $45,000 diamond necklace for my sister using my stolen identity." The room should have exploded in absolute shock. My parents should have turned on Bradley and Trayvon in horror. They should have been sickened by the betrayal. Instead, the silence stretched out cold and incredibly heavy. My father, Richard, calmly set down his wine bottle. He picked up his steak knife and carefully cut a piece of meat. He chewed it slowly, swallowed, and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Lower your voice, Megan. Trayvon just borrowed your identity to secure some seed money for his new startup. Your credit score was sitting there doing nothing anyway. Do not make a mountain out of a molehill. Traven leaned back in his custom-tailored suit, the leather dining chair creaking under his weight. He let out a low, rumbling chuckle that vibrated through the silent dining room. At 38, Trayvon possessed a dangerous kind of charisma, the sort of magnetic arrogance that allowed him to easily separate fools from their money. He raised his left hand to adjust his watch, pulling back his cuff to reveal a heavy, gleaming Rolex Daytona. A watch that, according to the freshly printed credit report, sitting in a puddle of spilled wine, had been purchased exactly 3 weeks ago under my name. Meg, this is exactly why you will always just be a pencil pusher, Trayvon said, his tone dripping with condescension. You look at a credit report and see debt. I look at a credit report and see liquid potential. I am leveraging dormant assets to scale my decentralized finance portfolio and my commercial real estate fund. Your credit score was sitting around at a useless 810 doing absolutely nothing for this family. Money is meant to move, Meg. It is meant to multiply. He picked up his wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, looking at me as if I were a child who had just thrown a tantrum over a broken toy. Brad understood the vision. Trayvon continued gesturing to my husband with his glass. Brad stepped up when my seed capital was temporarily tied up in an offshore crypto exchange. He acted like a real man, securing the bridge loans we needed to keep the fund aggressive. You should be thanking him. When we take the company public next year, I will toss you a few grand as a thank you for your involuntary contribution. I turned my gaze to Bradley. My husband of 5 years was sitting shoulder to shoulder with the man who had just stolen nearly $500,000 from me. Bradley did not look remorseful. He did not look ashamed. He looked incredibly comfortable swirling the vintage Cabernet in his glass. Come on, Meg, Bradley said, his voice smooth and persuasive, employing the exact same tone he used to close software sales. Family helps family. Trayvon needed liquidity. You are always so paranoid about money hoarding every paycheck, refusing to take risks. I knew you would say no if I asked you to invest, so I took the initiative. I put the capital to work. Trayvon is going to triple the initial investment by the 4th quarter. You are going to be a millionaire, and you are standing here yelling at us over some paperwork. Courtney reached up her manicured fingers, brushing against the cold, hard diamonds of the $45,000 Cartier necklace resting on her collarbone. She let out a soft, breathy laugh, tilting her head to look at me with absolute triumph. Besides, Megan, Courtney chimed in, her voice coated in sugar. Brad has such incredibly good taste in jewelry, does he not? Trayvon has been so busy with the startup, he just has not had the time to shop for my push present. Brad stepped up. He knew exactly what would make me happy. She looked at Bradley, offering him a warm, intimate smile. Bradley smiled back, a genuine flushed look of pride crossing his face. My husband was playing the role of the generous provider, showering my golden child sister with luxury entirely funded by my stolen identity. My mother, Patricia, clapped her hands together, a sharp, commanding sound designed to end the discussion. There it is, settled, Patricia announced, as if she were resolving a minor dispute over what to watch on television. Trayvon is handling the investments. Bradley was simply helping his brother-in-law. Sit down, Megan. Eat your dinner. And apologize to your sister for making a scene and upsetting the baby. I looked around the table at the 4 of them. My father, who viewed my career as a joke, compared to Trayvon's flashy illusions of wealth. My mother, who would excuse a federal crime as long as it kept Courtney draped in diamonds. My sister, who wore my financial ruin around her neck like a trophy. And my husband, the man who had traded our future to buy his way into their toxic elite inner circle. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. As a forensic accountant, I knew that screaming at criminals only gave them time to hide their assets. I needed to move faster than they could scheme. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I kept my eyes locked on Trayvon as my thumbs flew across the screen. I did not open my camera. I did not call the police. I opened the dedicated mobile applications for Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. What are you doing? Richard demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, authoritarian growl. Put the phone away at the dinner table. I ignored my father. I bypassed the biometric security prompts. I pulled up my master credit profiles. Meg put the phone down. Bradley warned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Stop acting crazy. Tap. Freeze Experian file. Confirmed. Tap. Freeze Equifax file. Confirmed. Tap. Freeze TransUnion file. Confirmed. I locked down my social security number with a cryptographic wall that not even a federal judge could bypass without my direct authorization. The free ride was officially over. Trayvon's bridge loans were dead in the water. Any further attempts to pull equity open credit cards or leverage my identity would bounce back with a hard fraud alert. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at Bradley, my expression completely hollowed out. Do not come back to my house tonight, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. Do not ever come back to my house. I turned around, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I ignored my mother shouting my name. I ignored my father demanding I come back to the table. I walked down the long hallway, my focus entirely fixed on the heavy mahogany front door. I just needed to get to my car. I just needed to get back to my home, change the locks, and start drafting the most brutal divorce filing in the history of the Illinois court system. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the cool brass door handle. Deep in my coat pocket, my phone chimed. It was not a text message tone. It was the specific high-priority alert chime from Chase Bank, a sound I had specifically programmed for large account movements. I paused, my hand resting on the brass handle. A cold spike of adrenaline pierced straight through my chest. I slowly pulled the phone from my pocket. The screen lit up with a push notification from my banking app. Withdrawal successful. $120,000 removed from joint savings. Available balance 0. I stared at the glowing white text. My lungs stopped working. The $450,000 in corporate debt had been a strategic leverage play. But this was an execution. Bradley had not just stolen my credit to buy my sister a necklace. While I was standing in the dining room, freezing the credit bureaus, Bradley had quietly logged into our joint banking portal under the table. He had just drained every single penny of my life savings. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white against the dark leather. The dashboard clock mocked me as I sped down the highway. $120,000. My entire life savings. Money I had meticulously gathered from every corporate bonus, every grueling 60-hour workweek, every vacation I had skipped to audit ledgers for my firm. Gone in a single digital breath. While I was standing in my parents' dining room securing the credit bureaus and stopping the bleeding from Trayvon and Courtney, Bradley had executed the final phase of his financial slaughter. I did not let the panic take over. As a forensic accountant, I knew that panic was the enemy of preservation. I categorized the betrayal in my mind. The corporate debt was fraud. The diamond necklace was identity theft. But the joint savings account withdrawal was something entirely different. In the eyes of family court, pulling funds from a shared marital account was a civil dispute, a messy gray area that could take years to untangle. Bradley knew exactly what he was doing. Or more likely, Trayvon had coached him perfectly. I tore into my suburban neighborhood, my tires squealing as I took the final corner. I just needed to get inside my home. I needed my secondary laptop, my hard drives, and my physical tax documents locked in the office safe. I parked on the street, not even bothering to pull into the driveway. I sprinted up the concrete walkway, the cold night air biting at my lungs. I reached the front door and shoved my brass key into the deadbolt. It jammed. I pulled it out and shoved it back in, twisting it hard. The metal scraped uselessly. I looked closer under the warm glow of the porch light. The lock cylinder was completely different. It was brand new, gleaming and unblemished. He had changed the locks. Bradley had locked me out of the house I had purchased with my own money 2 years before we even got married. Before I could reach for my phone to call a locksmith, the heavy wooden door swung inward. Bradley stood in the doorway. He was no longer wearing the charming apologetic mask he had worn at the mall, nor the smug grin he wore at my parents' dinner table. He looked entirely cold, his posture rigid with an unearned sense of authority. But he was not alone. Standing right beside my husband was a short, balding man in a remarkably cheap, shiny gray suit. He carried a battered leather briefcase and smelled overwhelmingly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. "You always were too slow when it mattered," Meg Bradley said, leaning against the doorframe of my house. The man in the shiny suit stepped forward, holding out a thick manila envelope. He did not introduce himself politely. He simply shoved the heavy envelope directly against my chest, forcing me to grab it or let it fall to the porch floor. "I am Arthur Vance," the man stated, his voice raspy. "I represent your husband in the matter of your impending divorce. You have officially been served. I advise you to review the terms carefully and retain counsel." I stared at the envelope in my hands. A divorce petition. He had cheated on me, stolen my identity, drained my life savings, and now he was serving me with divorce papers on the porch of my own home. I ripped the flap open and pulled out the legal documents. The street lamp provided just enough light for my trained eyes to scan the legal jargon and the financial demands. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at Bradley, my forensic mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the numbers printed on the page. "You are demanding 50% of the equity in this house," I stated, my voice eerily calm despite the roaring in my ears. "I paid the down payment before I met you. I pay the mortgage entirely from my corporate salary. You have never contributed a single dime to the principal." Vance, the lawyer, stepped forward, shielding Bradley. "This property is the marital residence, Mrs. Blackwood. My client has acquired significant sweat equity in this home. Furthermore, if you turn to page 4, you will see our petition for spousal support. We are requesting $5,000 a month in permanent alimony." Alimony. I repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. Bradley was a mid-level sales manager. He made a decent living. He did not need alimony. "Your relentless work schedule and severe emotional unavailability have caused my client profound psychological distress," Vance droned on, reciting the fabricated claims with practiced ease. "Your workaholic neglect forced him into a state of severe depression. He requires financial support to maintain the standard of living he has become accustomed to during your marriage while he seeks extensive therapy." I looked at Bradley. He was actually smirking. He was going to use my career, the very career that funded his comfortable lifestyle, as a weapon against me in court. He had drained my savings to pay this sleazy lawyer to drag me through a brutal, protracted legal battle. He wanted to bleed me dry, so I would be too financially exhausted to fight the identity theft charges against my sister and Trayvon. Before I could tell Arthur Vance exactly where he could shove his ridiculous petition, a pair of bright headlights swept across the manicured lawn. A silver Lexus pulled up to the curb directly behind my parked car. The engine cut off. The doors opened. My mother Patricia and my father Richard stepped out into the cold night air. For one brief, incredibly naive second, the little girl inside of me thought my parents had come to save me. I thought they had realized the horror of what Trayvon and Courtney had done at dinner. I thought they had driven here to stop Bradley from destroying my life. I was wrong. My parents did not walk toward me. They walked straight up the concrete steps, bypassed me completely, and turned to stand shoulder to shoulder with Bradley and his lawyer. They literally crossed the property line to stand with my abuser. My mother Patricia looked down her nose at me. Her face was a mask of absolute, terrifying determination. She raised her perfectly manicured hand and pointed a single finger directly at my chest. "Listen to me very carefully, Megan," Patricia said, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous whisper. "You are going to sign those divorce papers. You are going to give Bradley what he is asking for. And you are going to drop this entire ridiculous crusade regarding the corporate loans." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. "You want me to let Trayvon and Courtney walk away with $500,000 of my stolen money?" "Trayvon is building a legacy for your sister and your unborn niece, my father." Richard chimed in, his tone brokering no argument. "You are not going to ruin their future out of spite. If you go to the police," Patricia threatened, stepping closer so I could feel the heat of her anger. "If you file a single lawsuit against your sister or Trayvon, your father and I will testify under oath in family court and to the state licensing board." We will swear that you had a severe, violent schizophrenic breakdown during your sophomore year of college. We will tell them you have been hiding a massive mental health crisis for a decade. We will have your CPA license revoked permanently. You will never work in corporate finance again. I did not argue with my mother. I did not scream at my father. You cannot negotiate with people who are actively plotting to destroy your sanity and your freedom just to protect their favorite child. I turned on my heel, walked down the concrete steps, and got into my car. I locked the heavy doors, shoved the engine into drive, and sped away from the manicured lawns and the suffocating hypocrisy of my former life. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes until the grand, sweeping estates gave way to the harsh neon glow of the interstate commercial district. I pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a cheap, nameless motel that advertised hourly rates and free cable television. I paid for 3 nights in cash using the emergency $100 bills I kept hidden in my car's glove compartment. The desk clerk slid a plastic keycard across the scratched laminate counter without making eye contact. I walked to room 114, swiped the card, and pushed open the hollow wooden door. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, damp carpet, and heavy industrial bleach. The floral bedspread had visible burn marks. It was a massive, humiliating fall from grace for a woman who earned a mid-six-figure corporate salary. But it was exactly what I needed right now. It was completely untraceable. I set my laptop on the wobbly veneer desk. I looked down at the clothes I was wearing, the same tailored coat and silk blouse I had put on this morning when I foolishly thought my husband actually loved me. I pulled out my phone, opened the clock application, and set a timer for exactly 2 minutes. I hit start. I collapsed onto the edge of the lumpy mattress. The dam broke. I sobbed until my ribs physically ached. I cried for the husband who had morphed into a monster right before my eyes. I cried for the life savings I had bled for, vanishing into thin air while I stood frozen in my parents' dining room. I cried for the mother and father who would gladly watch me lose my professional license, my reputation, and my freedom, just to keep my sister draped in stolen diamonds. The betrayal was a heavy physical weight, crushing the breath out of my lungs. I screamed into the thin, scratchy motel pillow so the neighbors in the next room would not hear me. I let every ounce of pain, shock, terror, and grief rip through my nervous system. Then the alarm on my phone chimed. A harsh electronic ring. I sat up. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I walked into the tiny fluorescent-lit bathroom and splashed ice-cold water onto my cheeks. I stared at my reflection in the spotted, cloudy mirror. The devastated, heartbroken wife was gone. The discarded, unloved daughter was dead. I dried my face with a rough paper towel and walked back into the main room. The victim had clocked out. The forensic accountant was clocking in. I sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and connected to the motel's unsecured wireless network through a double-encrypted virtual private network. Bradley and Trayvon thought they were financial geniuses. They thought because they watched a few podcasts on cryptocurrency and aggressive real estate leveraging, they could outsmart a woman who spent 50 hours a week unraveling complex corporate embezzlement schemes for international conglomerates. They were about to learn exactly why I commanded a massive hourly billing rate. I started with the $450,000 in defaulted corporate loans. The credit report I had printed at the business center gave me the names of the 3 Delaware shell companies. I logged into my proprietary skip tracing software and began pulling the public records. Delaware is notoriously secretive regarding corporate ownership, but no digital wall is completely impenetrable if you know exactly where to apply pressure. I ran the employer identification numbers through a federal tax database loophole I regularly used for corporate audits. The routing numbers attached to the loan disbursements led me to a series of offshore holding accounts. I watched the money move in real time on my screen. Trayvon had taken the massive commercial bank loans and immediately funneled them through a digital coin tumbler, a sophisticated service designed to mix illicit cryptocurrency funds with clean funds to obscure the original source. It was money laundering 101. He converted the stolen cash into Ethereum, bounced it across 3 different international servers in jurisdictions without extradition treaties, and then brought it right back into the United States. He dumped the washed funds into a domestic real estate trust account. The exact same trust account he used to purchase the flashy commercial properties my parents loved to brag about at their country club. He was not a successful entrepreneur. He was running a highly illegal, fragile Ponzi scheme using my stolen credit as the foundational collateral. And Bradley was his eager accomplice, providing the necessary identity documents and draining our joint savings to cover the initial transfer fees and the sleazy lawyer's retainers. I typed furiously, my fingers flying across the keyboard, downloading every single ledger, taking screenshots of every transaction timestamp, and archiving the IP addresses used to authorize the electronic transfers. The IP addresses were the smoking gun. They geolocated directly to Trevon's home office and Bradley's work computer at his sales firm. They had been sloppy. They had arrogantly assumed I would just roll over and accept the financial ruin, paralyzed by the threat of my parents' fake psychological testimony. But as I dug deeper into the corporate registry documents for the 3 Delaware shell companies, my cold calculation hit a sudden, jagged roadblock. I needed the original incorporation filings. I needed to see exactly how Trevon had structured the executive hierarchy of these fake businesses to insulate himself. I routed my search through the Delaware Division of Corporations, requesting the stamped certified formation documents. The PDF files downloaded to my desktop. I clicked the first one open. I scrolled past the boilerplate legal text, scanning for Trevon's signature as the registered agent or Bradley's name as a silent partner. I found neither. I opened the second document. I opened the third. My blood turned to absolute ice. The registered agent for all 3 fraudulent entities was a faceless dummy corporation in Wyoming. But the chief executive officer, the sole managing member, the only human being legally tied to these money laundering operations, was not my brother-in-law. It was not my husband. The name printed in bold, undeniable ink at the bottom of every single federal and state filing was Megan Blackwood. They had not just stolen my credit score. They had completely weaponized my identity. Trevon and Bradley had deliberately structured a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud and money laundering ring, and they had positioned me at the absolute top of the pyramid. If the bank auditors flagged the defaulted loans, or if the Internal Revenue Service noticed the tumbled cryptocurrency, they would not go looking for Trevon. They would not arrest Bradley. The federal agents would come kicking down my door. I was the sole fall guy. I was facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The Wyoming incorporation papers glowed with toxic intent on my screen. My name, my social security number, my forged electronic signature authorizing the creation of Apex Holdings LLC, Summit Ventures Group, and Vanguard Commercial Properties. Trevon had not just stolen my credit to buy a commercial building. He had constructed a financial guillotine and placed my head directly on the block. I did not freeze. The initial shock crystallized into pure, hyper-focused rage. As a forensic accountant, my daily life involved dissecting the financial ruin of corporate giants. I knew exactly how federal prosecutors built their cases. They followed the paper trail to the registered executive. They looked at the CEO. They looked at me. Trevon had always loved to hold court at family gatherings, swirling an expensive glass of bourbon while openly mocking my career. Corporate accountants are just glorified slaves to the system, Megan, he had sneered last Thanksgiving, adjusting his custom silk tie. You spend your life counting other people's money. I create wealth. I build ecosystems. You track the past, but I fund the future. I pulled the corporate banking records attached to Apex Holdings, using his mockery as fuel. He had built an ecosystem, all right. A parasitic, highly illegal ecosystem. I began tracing the incoming wire transfers. The initial deposits into the Delaware shell companies were not institutional commercial loans, as he had bragged to my parents. They were private deposits. $50,000 from a retired school teacher's pension fund. $200,000 from a local dentistry practice. $400,000 from a regional construction company's expansion account. Trevon was not a brilliant real estate developer. He was running a massive localized Ponzi scheme. He was scamming everyday investors out of millions, using their fresh capital to pay off early investors, fund his lavish lifestyle, and buy my golden child sister Cartier necklaces. The structure of the fraud was intricate, but the execution was sloppy. I followed the digital routing numbers from the local victim accounts to the cryptocurrency tumblers. That was where my husband entered the equation. Bradley was not just a naive brother-in-law helping out with a bridge loan, he was the designated money mule. The digital ledger clearly showed Bradley's electronic signature authorizing the transfer of funds. Bradley was actively moving the stolen investor money, layering it through his mid-level software sales firm. He was writing fake vendor invoices for consulting services, pushing the clean cash through his corporate accounts, and then dumping the washed money directly into the Delaware shell companies. The companies legally owned by me. My husband had deliberately orchestrated a money laundering pipeline using his own employer to funnel illicit funds into my lap. He was framing me from the inside out. I needed the absolute bottom of the rabbit hole. I needed the core financial routing data before they realized I was inside their network. Trayvon considered himself a tech-savvy genius, but his firewall was an absolute joke. He used off-the-shelf encryption software, the kind of digital padlock a novice buys, thinking it guarantees absolute security. For someone who routinely audited multinational pharmaceutical conglomerates and dismantled sophisticated offshore embezzlement rings, breaking his security protocols took less than 12 minutes. I bypassed his two-factor authentication by routing a password reset request through the master recovery email. He had foolishly linked the recovery protocol to the Apex Holdings domain. Since I was the legally registered CEO of Apex Holdings, I simply verified my identity with the domain registrar and seized control of the entire server. The digital vault cracked open. Raw, unfiltered financial data flooded my screen in cascading rows. The trail of tumbled Ethereum did not just loop back into domestic real estate purchases. The domestic properties were merely a front, a physical illusion to keep the local investors pacified. The bulk of the stolen capital was being systematically siphoned off into two offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. The routing numbers were disguised under layered corporate trusts virtually untraceable to the average local auditor, but glowing like neon signs to a forensic specialist. Trayvon was preparing to run. He was packing millions of dollars into untouchable offshore accounts. When the Ponzi scheme inevitably collapsed, he and Courtney would vanish to a tropical jurisdiction with no extradition treaty. And I would be left sitting in a federal courtroom, the documented CEO of the entire fraudulent enterprise taking the fall for their stolen millions. I navigated through the secured files until I found the Holy Grail, the master ledger. It was an unencrypted spreadsheet where Trayvon meticulously and arrogantly tracked the entire fraud. It detailed every stolen dollar, the names of every defrauded investor, every laundering fee paid to Bradley, and the exact coordinates and access codes for the Cayman Islands accounts. It was the blueprint of their entire criminal operation. I slammed my finger onto the trackpad. I hit download. A green progress bar flashed onto the center of my screen. 10%, 30%. The motel room was dead silent, except for the frantic whirring of my laptop's cooling fan. 50%, 70%. I gripped the edge of the desk, my eyes locked on the screen. If I secured this file, I had the ammunition to destroy them before they could destroy me. 90%. A violent, heavy pounding shook the thin wooden door of my motel room. The force of the knocks rattled the cheap metal doorframe. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had paid in cash. I had parked 3 blocks away. Nobody knew I was here. The pounding resumed louder and more aggressive. I slammed my laptop shut, plunging the room into darkness. I grabbed my phone, slipped off my shoes, and crept silently toward the door. I pressed my eye against the scratched, cloudy peephole. It was not Bradley. It was not Trayvon. It was a tall man in a dark windbreaker holding a thick brown manila envelope. I recognized the stance. I recognized the rigid, uncompromising posture. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open exactly 2 inches, keeping the security chain engaged. The man did not ask for my name. He did not confirm my identity. He simply shoved the heavy envelope through the narrow gap in the doorframe, forcing me to catch it against my chest. He turned on his heel and walked rapidly down the concrete exterior corridor, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt back into place. I turned on the small desk lamp and looked down at the heavy package in my hands. It was not another divorce petition from Arthur Vance. The official, unmistakable seal of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division stared back at me. I broke the seal on the heavy manila envelope, my thumb tracing the embossed eagle of the Internal Revenue Service. As a certified public accountant, I dealt with the IRS daily. I knew the difference between a routine compliance check and a targeted tactical strike. The thick stack of paper in my hands was a tactical strike. I spread the documents across the scratched veneer of the motel desk. The first page was a Form 4564, an information document request, but it was printed on the dreaded letterhead of the Criminal Investigation Division. The bold black text outlined the absolute scope of the inquiry. The numbers leaped off the page, striking me with the force of a physical blow. $2 million. The federal government was formally auditing me for $2 million in unpaid corporate taxes, deliberately concealed capital gains, and multiple counts of suspected international wire fraud. The document officially named me as the sole managing director and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings Summit Ventures and Vanguard Commercial Properties. The IRS had already flagged the exact same offshore Cayman Islands transfers I had just discovered on Trayvon's secured servers. They were demanding the immediate production of all corporate ledgers, bank statements, client rosters, and encrypted communication records. Failure to comply within the specified window would result in immediate asset seizure, frozen accounts, and a federal indictment. My lungs constricted. $2 million. I did not have a fraction of that amount. Bradley had drained my life savings just hours ago. If the federal government froze my remaining personal accounts, I would not even be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire the caliber of white-collar criminal defense attorney required to keep me out of a federal penitentiary. I flipped to the second section of the packet. My forensic training kicked in ruthlessly, overriding the rising tide of blind panic. Federal audits of this magnitude do not trigger randomly out of the bureaucratic ether. They require a catalyst. They require a red flag large enough to alert the federal hounds. I found the catalyst on page 12. It was a heavily redacted copy of a Form 211, an application for award for original information. It was an official whistleblower tip. I read the narrative section of the form. The betrayal was so profoundly meticulous it actually made my stomach churn. The anonymous informant had provided the IRS with an incredibly detailed, highly fabricated story. The tipster claimed that I, utilizing my specialized insider knowledge as a corporate forensic accountant, had established a complex web of shell companies to launder illicit funds. The narrative explicitly stated that I was using my husband Bradley as an unwitting pawn to process the fraudulent transactions through his legitimate sales firm. The informant was not just reporting a crime. They were directing the entirety of the federal crosshairs precisely onto my forehead, painting me as a brilliant, manipulative financial sociopath. I stared at the thick, black redaction blocks covering the informant's identifying information. The IRS always protected their whistleblowers, but they had made a standard, predictable bureaucratic error. Attached to the back of the printed tip sheet was a digital submission receipt, a simple alphanumeric confirmation string generated when the form was uploaded through the IRS web portal. The investigating agents assumed a regular taxpayer would not know what to do with a raw submission ID. They were right. A regular taxpayer would panic. I cracked my knuckles and minimized the encrypted folder containing Trayvon's master ledger. I opened a secondary secure terminal on my laptop. I logged into the Federal Practitioner Portal using my active CPA credentials. I bypassed the standard user interface, dropping directly into the back-end directory where authorized tax professionals upload and review documentation. I ran a targeted query using the exact alphanumeric submission string from the whistleblower receipt. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second before retrieving the original digital file packet. I did not care about the redacted names. I cared about the metadata. Every digital file carries a silent footprint, an invisible stamp of its origin. I ran the file through an EXIF data extractor. I watched lines of code cascade down the black terminal screen, stripping away the basic encryption layers to reveal the raw source information. It took less than 40 seconds to isolate the origin IP address and the MAC address of the device used to upload the fraudulent tip. I copied the IP address and pasted it directly next to the IP address I had pulled from Trayvon's cryptocurrency laundering transfers just 10 minutes earlier. The numbers were a perfect identical match. The geolocation pinged a familiar, wealthy suburban neighborhood. It pinged my sister's 5-bedroom luxury estate. I sat back in the cheap motel chair, the silence of the room ringing loudly in my ears. The sheer scale of the sociopathy was breathtaking. Trayvon had not just stolen my identity to fund his lavish lifestyle and buy Courtney diamonds. When he realized his Ponzi scheme was entirely unsustainable, he had actively, deliberately reported me to the federal government. He threw me to the feds to protect himself. He was attempting to collect a massive whistleblower bounty from the IRS while simultaneously securing absolute immunity, ensuring I would rot in a federal prison while he and my golden child sister walked away with millions in offshore accounts. And my parents had stood on my front porch aggressively defending him. They had threatened to destroy my career with fake psychological testimony to protect the man who was actively framing their other daughter for federal crimes. My phone buzzed against the scratched wood of the desk. The sudden vibration made me jump. The bright screen illuminated the dark room. It was a text message from Bradley. I picked up the phone. I read the words slowly, letting the pure, unadulterated extortion wash over me. "Tough break with the IRS, Meg." The text read, "Trayvon has some friends in high places. He knows some high-level fixers who can handle federal audits. Sign the house over to me. Completely drop your ridiculous threats against Courtney and Trayvon will make the audit go away. He can get the whistleblower to retract the statement. You have 48 hours before the feds freeze everything. Be smart for once in your life." I stared at the glowing screen. Bradley was playing the role of the concerned husband offering a lifeline that was actually a hangman's noose. He thought I was a terrified, spineless pencil pusher. He thought I was sitting in the dark crying over a mountain of federal threats, willing to trade my home and my freedom for a sliver of false safety. He had no idea. He had no idea that I was already inside their network. He had no idea that I possessed the original Wyoming incorporation documents. And he had absolutely no idea that I was currently staring at the decrypted master ledger of their entire criminal empire. I did not reply. I did not block his number. I set the phone face down on the desk. Trayvon and Bradley thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought they held all the leverage, but they had just handed a loaded gun to a woman who knew exactly where to aim. I powered the phone down and set it face down on the scratched veneer desk. The IRS thought they were closing a net around a $2 million tax evasion case. Trayvon thought he had successfully isolated me as the sole target. They were both operating on incomplete data. I spent the next 6 hours meticulously compiling the real narrative. I opened my forensic auditing software and began building the master file. I did not just highlight the discrepancies. I constructed an impenetrable chronological map of the entire criminal enterprise. Trayvon was not a brilliant real estate developer or a visionary startup founder. He was running a massive localized Ponzi scheme. He was scamming everyday local investors out of millions using their fresh capital to pay off early investors, fund his lavish lifestyle, and buy my sister $45,000 Cartier necklaces. I pulled the corporate banking records attached to Apex Holdings. The initial deposits into the Delaware shell companies were not institutional commercial loans. They were private, vulnerable deposits. $50,000 from a retired school teacher's pension fund, $200,000 from a local dentistry practice, $400,000 from a regional construction company's expansion account. I linked those local victim deposits directly to Bradley. My husband was not just a naive brother-in-law helping out with a bridge loan. He was the designated money mule. I traced the exact timestamps of the money moving through Bradley's mid-level software sales firm. He was writing fake vendor invoices for fabricated consulting services, pushing the clean cash through his corporate accounts, and dumping the washed money directly into the cryptocurrency tumblers. I mapped the exact coordinates of the Ethereum emerging on the other side of those tumblers to land in Trayvon's offshore holding accounts, located in the Cayman Islands. I matched the IP addresses from the IRS whistleblower tip directly to the IP addresses used to authorize the offshore wire transfers. I pulled the digital footprints, the MAC addresses, and the encrypted communication logs. I built a financial guillotine and I sharpened the blade until it was flawless. At 5 in the morning, I packed my laptop and left the motel. I drove to an all-night commercial print shop on the edge of the industrial district. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I fed a heavy stack of premium paper into the industrial printer. I stood there for 2 hours watching the machine spit out page after page of undeniable damning evidence. I purchased a heavy 4-inch D-ring binder, a box of reinforced plastic sleeves, and color-coded index tabs. I sat at a scratched laminate table in the corner of the print shop and assembled my weapon. The Blackwood audit structure. Red tabs. The Delaware Shell Companies, complete with the Wyoming Dummy Corporation registrations and the forged electronic signatures weaponizing my identity. Blue tabs. The Money Mule Pipeline. Every fake invoice and unauthorized wire transfer executed by Bradley through his employer's network. Yellow tabs. The Cayman Islands. Master ledger. The exact routing numbers, offshore account balances, and the unredacted list of local investors Trayvon had defrauded. Green tabs. The whistleblower metadata. The digital footprint proving Trayvon filed the false IRS report from his own living room. The final document was 400 pages of pure lethal accountability. It weighed nearly 10 pounds. I walked out of the print shop just as the sun began to rise, painting the concrete skyline in bruised shades of purple and gold. I did not drive to the IRS building. The Internal Revenue Service was a bureaucratic machine focused entirely on recovering their $2 million. They would freeze my accounts, drag me through endless interrogations, and treat me as a hostile suspect until proven otherwise. I needed an agency that hunted cartels and dismantled organized crime syndicates. I needed apex predators. I drove directly to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The building was a monolithic fortress of glass and steel. I walked through the revolving doors, my heels clicking sharply against the polished granite floor. I bypassed the civilian waiting area and approached the bulletproof glass of the security desk. "I need to speak with the special agent in charge of the white-collar crime division," I stated, my voice projecting absolute authority. The armed guard barely looked up from his monitor. "If you want to report a financial crime, ma'am, you need to use the online portal or call the tip line. Agents do not take walk-in appointments." I pulled my certified public accountant license from my wallet and pressed it flat against the reinforced glass. "My name is Megan Blackwood. I am the documented CEO of Apex Holdings, a Delaware shell company currently under active investigation by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division for $2 million in tax fraud. I am here to surrender evidence of a multi-million-dollar interstate wire fraud and international money laundering syndicate. If you tell me to call a tip line, I will walk out that door and take this to the Securities and Exchange Commission." The guard stopped typing. He looked at my license, looked at the massive binder in my arms, and picked up his desk phone. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a windowless, soundproof interrogation room. The door clicked open, and a tall man with sharp, exhausted eyes walked in. He wore a rumpled navy suit and held a lukewarm cup of coffee. He tossed a legal pad onto the metal table and sat across from me. "I am Special Agent Reynolds," he said, his tone skeptical and impatient. "Security says you are claiming involvement in an active IRS CID investigation, but you want to bypass the Treasury and hand evidence directly to the Bureau. Why are you here, Mrs. Blackwood?" I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not explain my emotional distress. I lifted the 10-pound binder and dropped it onto the center of the metal table with a deafening thud. You're investigating Trayvon for a $2 million tax fraud, I said, leaning forward. You're looking at the wrong numbers. It's a $15 million Ponzi scheme, and I can hand you the entire network on a silver platter. Agent Reynolds stared at me for a long, silent moment. He set his coffee down. He pulled the binder toward him and flipped it open to the first page. I sat perfectly still as I watched his eyes scan the summary brief I had drafted. I watched his skepticism evaporate, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a seasoned federal investigator. He flipped to the red tabs tracing the forged signatures. He turned to the blue tabs, absorbing the sheer volume of Bradley's money mule transfers. He flipped to the yellow tabs, his finger trailing over the offshore routing numbers and the unencrypted Cayman Islands ledger. This was not a disorganized tip from a scorned spouse. This was a fully prosecuted, flawlessly mapped financial autopsy. I had handed him the career-making bust of a lifetime. Agent Reynolds slowly closed the binder. He looked up at me, his demeanor entirely shifted. The exhaustion was gone. He looked at me not as a suspect, but as a highly lethal asset. "What do you need from us?" he asked. I looked him dead in the eye. A slow, cold smirk spread across my face. "I need a wire," I said, "and I need you to wait for my signal." Agent Reynolds did not blink. He looked at the staggering weight of the forensic binder resting on his metal interrogation table, then looked back up at me. A sharp, predatory smile finally broke through his exhausted bureaucratic demeanor. We spent the next 2 hours in that windowless, soundproof room, mapping the absolute destruction of Summit Ventures. He authorized the federal wire and immediately assigned a tactical surveillance team to my case. But he needed one crucial final element to trigger a localized RICO sweep. He needed Trayvon and Bradley in a centralized location, actively engaging in extortion on a hot mic, surrounded by their co-conspirators and illicit assets. I promised him I would deliver exactly that. I walked out of the regional FBI field office and stepped into the blinding afternoon sun. I unlocked my sedan, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The adrenaline of the counteroffensive faded, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. To catch a predator, you have to play dead. It was time to initiate the final phase of the trap. I opened the messaging app on my phone and navigated to the family group chat. The thread was currently filled with pictures of Courtney's new luxury SUV and my mother's endless praises of Trayvon's brilliant business acumen. I took a deep breath, deliberately channeling the sheer suffocating panic I would have been feeling if I had not just weaponized the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I intentionally misspelled words and ignored punctuation to mimic the frantic typing of a trembling hand. "Trayvon Bradley, please," I typed, staring at the flashing cursor. "I just got a criminal audit notice from the IRS. They are coming after me for $2 million. I do not have it. Bradley, my accounts are empty. They are threatening federal prison and asset seizure. I am so scared. Trayvon, you said you had a fixer. You said you could make things go away. Please help me. I will do whatever you want." I hit send. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and waited in the silence of the parking garage. I did not have to wait long. The screen lit up. I picked the phone back up and watched the read receipts populate instantly. There was no barrage of concerned phone calls. There was no immediate panic from my mother about her daughter facing federal incarceration. There was only the swift, brutal execution of their psychological trap. Courtney was the first to reply. Her message popped up on the screen, practically dripping with manicured disdain. "Finally, you're acting your age. You always were the weak link." I stared at the glowing words. My sister, the woman whose lavish lifestyle and diamond jewelry were currently being funded by stolen pension. Money was openly gloating over my impending destruction. She had spent her entire life parading her unearned status while subtly tearing down my career, and now she was relishing what she believed was her ultimate victory. Seconds later, my mother's response appeared beneath Courtney's. Patricia, the woman who had birthed me, read a text stating her daughter was terrified of going to a federal penitentiary and responded with absolute complacency. "See, family always knows best. We told you Trayvon was looking out for us. You should have trusted him from the beginning instead of causing problems. They were entirely unified in their delusion. They honestly believed they had broken me. Then the screen pulsed with a direct message from Trayvon. He did not post in the family group chat. He wanted this exchange isolated, demonstrating his absolute unchecked control over my fate. You played with the big dogs, Meg, and you got bit, his message read. But I am a generous guy. I can make a few calls. I can get the whistleblower to retract the statement and make the IRS look the other way. But my protection comes with a price. I held the phone tight, my thumbs hovering over the digital keyboard. What do you want? I typed back. First, you sign the house deed entirely over to Bradley by Friday noon. No lawyers, no delays, no questions. Second, you need a serious lesson in humility. You need to remember your place in the pecking order. A second text immediately followed the first, laying out the true depth of his sociopathy. I am hosting the Summit Ventures charity gala this Saturday night at the Beaumont Hotel. All my top investors will be there. The mayor will be there. You are going to work the event. As the coat check girl, you will stand in the lobby, take our coats, smile at my guests, and keep your mouth shut. Prove to me you are humbled, and I will make your federal audit vanish. I lowered the phone, a cold, sharp laugh escaping my lips, echoing off the dashboard of my car. The arrogance was staggering. Trayvon was not satisfied with merely stealing my home and framing me for his crimes. He wanted a public execution of my pride. He wanted me standing in a velvet-lined lobby, subservient and broken, checking the coats of the very people he was actively defrauding. The Beaumont Hotel Gala was his crown jewel event. It was a high-society masquerade designed to lure in new, wealthy victims to feed the bottomless pit of his Ponzi scheme. He wanted to parade his conquered, highly educated sister-in-law in front of his fraudulent empire as a trophy of his dominance. It was a masterclass in narcissistic humiliation. It was also the greatest tactical error of his life. Agent Reynolds had explicitly asked for a centralized location. He needed a closed environment where Trayvon Bradley, their offshore fixers, and their unwitting local investors would all be gathered under one roof. Trayvon had just provided the venue, the date, and the guest list. He had hand-delivered the FBI the perfect hunting ground. I looked at the text message demanding my total submission. Trayvon wanted a broken, terrified woman holding his expensive coat. He was going to get a federally wired informant holding the detonator to his entire existence. I tapped the screen, typing my response with steady, unwavering precision. I'll be there. The Beaumont Hotel lobby was a cathedral of manufactured wealth. Vaulted ceilings painted with gold leaf accents soared above polished marble floors, while a string quartet played a soft classical arrangement in the corner. It was the absolute perfect stage for a sociopath. I stood behind the long mahogany counter of the cloakroom, encased in a stiff charcoal gray polyester uniform that was deliberately 2 sizes too large. It smelled of industrial bleach and submission. This was Trayvon's grand design. He wanted me stripped of my professional identity, reduced to a faceless servant trapped in the background of his triumph. What Trayvon did not know was that the bulky, ill-fitting fabric of the uniform perfectly concealed the flat, high-definition federal transmitter taped directly over my sternum. 3 blocks away, parked in a heavily armored, unmarked utility van, Special Agent Reynolds and a 5-man tactical surveillance unit were running live audio checks. Every breath I took, every rustle of fabric, and every word spoken within a 10-foot radius was being broadcast directly onto encrypted FBI servers. I was not a defeated accountant. I was a walking, fully operational federal trap. The heavy brass doors opened and the victims began to pour in. I watched them arrive in their tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, completely oblivious to the fact that they were stepping into a financial slaughterhouse. I recognized faces from the master ledger I had decrypted just 24 hours earlier. The local dentist who had sunk $200,000 of his practice's capital into Summit Ventures handed me his trench coat. The regional construction magnate who had drained his company's expansion account smiled politely as I handed him a numbered plastic ticket. They were preparing to drink Trayvon's expensive champagne and celebrate the illusion of explosive real estate returns, utterly unaware that their life savings were already sitting in a Cayman Islands offshore account. Then my parents walked through the revolving doors. My mother wore a deep emerald evening gown, her hair professionally styled into a flawless updo. My father adjusted his custom silk tie, projecting the unshakable image of the proud, successful patriarch. They stepped toward the cloakroom to drop their coats. My mother's eyes met mine across the mahogany counter. For a fraction of a second, I saw clear recognition flash across her face, followed immediately by a hardened, deliberate blankness. She did not say a word. She did not offer a single flicker of maternal concern for the daughter she believed was facing a $2 million federal indictment and imminent incarceration. Instead, she pivoted sharply, holding her cashmere wrap out to the other attendant working beside me. She looked right through me, effectively erasing my existence to protect her proximity to Trayvon's stolen wealth. I felt my pulse steady into a cold, rhythmic beat. Any lingering trace of familial loyalty I held completely evaporated in that silent, ruthless dismissal. A wave of expensive, overpowering perfume announced my sister's arrival. Courtney swept into the grand lobby, clinging tightly to Trayvon's arm. She was the absolute center of attention, draped in a floor-length crimson gown that caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. But my eyes locked instantly onto her throat. Resting against her collarbone was a thick, blindingly brilliant diamond necklace. It was the $45,000 Cartier piece. I knew the exact date it was purchased. I knew the exact routing number of the stolen retired teacher's pension fund that had paid for those diamonds. Courtney spotted me immediately. Her eyes lit up with a malicious, predatory gleam. She detached herself from Trayvon and walked directly toward my section of the counter. She slowly unbuttoned her white fur coat, maintaining unwavering, condescending eye contact. "Finally, you are acting your age," Courtney sneered, her voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the crowded lobby. "You always were the weak link, Meg. But I have to admit this look suits you. Drab, invisible, exactly where you belong." She did not hand the coat across the counter. She held the heavy fur out over the polished marble floor and deliberately opened her fingers. The coat dropped to the ground, pooling at her designer heels. "Pick it up!" she commanded, her tone loud enough to draw the attention of several nearby guests. "And be careful with it. It is worth more than your life." I looked at the coat on the floor. I looked at the stolen diamonds glittering on her neck. I kept my face entirely submissive, allowing her unfiltered arrogance to feed directly into the federal audio feed. I stepped out from behind the counter, bent my knees, and picked up the fur. "Yes, Courtney," I said, ensuring the microphone picked up my manufactured defeat. "Right away." She laughed, a sharp, triumphant sound, and turned on her heel to join her husband in the main ballroom. She thought she had broken my spirit. She had just provided the FBI with crystal-clear audio confirmation of her knowingly receiving and flaunting stolen assets. An hour passed. The lobby emptied as the guests moved into the main dining hall for Trayvon's keynote speech. The string quartet stopped playing. The cloakroom was dead silent, smelling of damp wool and expensive coats. The heavy oak door at the back of the coatroom clicked open. Bradley slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind him to ensure absolute privacy. He was not alone. He was flanked by a tall man in a sharp slate-gray suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. I recognized him instantly from Trayvon's decrypted files. It was Arthur Vance, the corporate fixer who helped structure the Wyoming dummy corporations. Bradley walked past the rows of hanging coats and backed me directly against the mahogany counter. The smug, victorious grin on his face was suffocating. "You look terrible," Meg Bradley said, his voice dripping with superiority. "But I told you, Trevin would put you in your place. Are you ready to stop playing games?" Arthur Vance stepped forward, placing his leather briefcase onto the counter. He snapped the golden clasps open and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents, sliding a heavy silver pen across the wood. "This is a quitclaim deed for the marital residence," Vance stated, his voice a low, mechanical hum. "And a full non-disclosure agreement regarding Summit Ventures Apex Holdings and all associated financial transfers. You will sign your complete ownership of the property over to Bradley immediately." I looked at the documents, then up at my husband. And if I sign this, I asked, deliberately keeping my voice small, terrified and shaking. What happens to the IRS audit? What happens to the $2 million I am terrified of going to prison, Bradley? I will do whatever you want. Bradley scoffed, leaning in close, taking the bait flawlessly. Trayvon owns the whistleblower Meg. He submitted the tip himself using an encrypted IP address from his own living room. As soon as you sign this house over to me, he makes a call, the tip gets retracted, and the federal audit magically disappears. You really thought you could beat us? I have been running Trayvon's dirty cash through my vendor invoices into the Caymans for a year. You are outmatched. He tapped the paper hard with his index finger. But if you do not sign, the IRS freezes your bank accounts on Monday. You go to a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, and I take the house anyway. Sign the deed, Meg. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the paperwork. They had done it. They had explicitly detailed their extortion, admitted to filing a fraudulent federal report, confessed to international money laundering, and outlined their conspiracy to manipulate a federal audit, all in a closed room with zero background noise. I slowly reached out and picked up the silver pen. With my left hand, I reached up and casually adjusted the stiff, oversized collar of my uniform. My thumb brushed the hard, flat edge of the FBI transmitter, pressing the secondary switch to signal the tactical team waiting outside. I looked up at Bradley. The manufactured fear instantly vanished from my eyes, replaced by a cold, ruinous certainty. I will be right here when they breach the doors. I looked down at the heavy silver pen resting on the mahogany counter. The cold, ruinous certainty that had just crystallized in my mind needed to be hidden for exactly 2 more minutes. I could not let Bradley see the predator behind my eyes. I needed him to see the prey. I forced my shoulders to slump. I let my breathing grow shallow and ragged, mimicking the onset of a full panic attack. I reached out and picked up the pen. I made sure my hand shook violently enough that the silver barrel rattled against the polished wood. Bradley sighed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed in the quiet isolation of the cloakroom. The muffled bass of the string quartet and the clinking of crystal champagne glasses drifted through the heavy oak door from the main ballroom. It was a sharp, sickening contrast to the brutal extortion happening in the shadows of the coat racks. Brad, I whispered, keeping my voice small and fractured. If I sign this, you and Trayvon promise to get the IRS off my back. You promise they will not find out. You guys set up those shell companies in my name. Bradley threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, genuine laugh fueled by months of unchecked arrogance and the absolute certainty that he was the smartest man in the room. He leaned heavily over the counter, invading my personal space, completely oblivious to the high-definition federal transmitter taped directly over my sternum. Babe, Trayvon has the funds bouncing through 3 different offshore accounts, Bradley sneered, adjusting his custom gold cufflinks. The feds are too stupid to trace it back to us. They think you did it because your name is on the Wyoming registry. Just sign the deed, and Trayvon will bribe the auditor. We already have the cash set aside for the payoff. It is a standard operational expense for Summit Ventures. My heart hammered a steady, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. As a forensic accountant, my brain automatically categorized every single word leaving his mouth into distinct federal statutes. He had just handed me everything. In less than 40 seconds, my husband had explicitly confessed to international money laundering, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to bribe a federal official. He had wrapped a neat, undeniable bow around a massive RICO case and handed it directly to the Department of Justice on a pristine silver platter. But I wanted the final nail in the coffin. I wanted the corporate fixer, too. I turned my terrified gaze toward Arthur Vance. The lawyer stood rigidly beside Bradley, his face an emotionless mask of legal complicity. He checked his luxury watch, clearly eager to return to the champagne and caviar. And the incorporation documents, I asked, my voice trembling perfectly as I clutched the silver pen. The ones filed in Delaware and Wyoming. You guarantee they cannot be traced back to Bradley's computer? Vance rolled his eyes, openly annoyed by my apparent hysteria. Mrs. Blackwood, I personally structured the electronic signatures using a proxy server. The IP addresses were scrubbed. The federal government has a mountain of paperwork showing you authorized the creation of Apex Holdings. You are the sole executive on record. Now stop stalling and sign the quitclaim deed so we can enjoy the gala. The trap was completely, flawlessly set. Every single element required for a federal indictment had just been spoken into a live, continuous audio feed. I stopped shaking. The transformation was instantaneous. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back, as the manufactured fear entirely evaporated from my posture. I gripped the heavy silver pen firmly. I did not hesitate. I pressed the tip to the heavy parchment and signed my name with smooth, elegant strokes across the bottom of the quitclaim deed. I was signing away the house I had purchased with my own hard-earned money, but it did not matter. By midnight, the property would be locked down under a federal asset forfeiture warrant. The piece of paper Bradley wanted so desperately was entirely worthless. I slid the signed document across the mahogany counter. I looked up at my husband. A slow, wide smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of submission. It was a smile of absolute lethal control. "Thanks, Brad," I said, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. Bradley froze. He reached for the paperwork, but his hand hesitated above the counter. The sudden drastic shift in my demeanor broke his concentration. He looked at my face, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He expected tears. He expected me to collapse onto the industrial carpet in a puddle of defeat. He did not expect me to look like a woman who had just won a war. "What is wrong with you?" Bradley muttered, snatching the deed off the counter and shoving it into Vance's leather briefcase. "Nothing at all," I replied, folding my hands neatly in front of me on the counter. "You should get back to the party. You would not want to miss Traven's big speech." Bradley glared at me, clearly unsettled by my sudden composure, but his towering arrogance quickly overrode his intuition. He scoffed, turning on his heel. "Just do your job and check the coats," he snapped. He and Vance pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped back out into the glittering gold-leafed lobby. They disappeared into the dense crowd of wealthy victims and high society socialites, entirely unaware that they were walking on borrowed time. I waited until the heavy door swung completely shut, sealing me back in the quiet isolation of the cloakroom. I reached up and tapped the collar of my stiff, ill-fitting uniform, pressing directly against the hidden microphone. "Did you get all that, Agent Reynolds?" I asked into the silence of the room. There was a brief crackle of static in my hidden earpiece. Then the deep, exhausted voice of the lead FBI investigator came through, laced with undeniable predatory satisfaction. Loud and clear, Mrs. Blackwood. Agent Reynolds replied. "We have the offshore accounts, the forgery admission, and the bribery conspiracy confirmed on tape. Move to Phase 2. Agent Reynolds' voice was the starting pistol. I reached up and gripped the collar of the oversized charcoal gray coat check uniform. I pulled the heavy industrial zipper down the front, the cheap polyester parting with a harsh, ripping sound. I let the fabric slide off my shoulders and dropped to the floor, stepping out of the humiliating shell Trevon had designed for me. Underneath, I was not wearing the cheap civilian clothes he expected. I wore a tailored, razor-sharp, midnight blue designer suit. I adjusted the lapels, ensuring the high-definition federal transmitter remained perfectly concealed against my silk blouse. I reached into my inner pocket, my fingers brushing the cool metal of the silver USB drive I had encrypted earlier that morning. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the cloakroom and stepped into the grand corridor leading to the main ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted prime rib, and the intoxicating illusion of exclusivity. I slipped through the massive double doors at the back of the hall and stood in the shadows, taking in the full scope of the trap. The ballroom was a sea of circular tables draped in black velvet and illuminated by hundreds of floating candles. The city's elite sat captivated, sipping vintage champagne, completely spellbound by the man on the stage. Trayvon stood behind a sleek, transparent lucite podium. He held a wireless microphone, pacing the stage with the effortless, predatory grace of a televangelist selling salvation. Behind him, a massive projection screen displayed the imposing gold-lettered logo of Summit Ventures. "We are not just talking about returns on investment tonight." Trevon projected, his deep, resonant voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We are talking about legacy. We are talking about financial freedom. True generational wealth is not built by following the rules of a broken system. It is built by visionaries." by people who recognize an opportunity and seize it before the rest of the world even wakes up. You are the visionaries. Together, we are building a foundation that your children and your children's children will stand on forever. The crowd erupted into polite, eager applause. They were entirely hooked, ready to hand over their bank routing numbers to a man who viewed them as nothing more than walking ATMs. It was time. I stepped out of the shadows and into the center aisle. The thick carpet muffled my footsteps at first, but the sheer, unyielding purpose of my stride acted like a magnet. Heads began to turn. I did not look left or right. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the stage, a guided missile tracking its target. I passed the back rows of minor investors and approached the VIP tables near the front. This was where Trayvon kept his most prized marks and where he had seated his willing accomplices. My parents were seated at table 1 directly adjacent to the stage. My father was enthusiastically applauding Trayvon's speech, a look of profound, unearned pride plastered across his face. My mother, Patricia, was sipping from a crystal flute, basking in the reflected glow of her son-in-law's perceived success. She saw me first. Her champagne flute paused halfway to her mouth. The look of relaxed superiority shattered instantly, replaced by a contortion of pure venomous horror. She registered the midnight blue suit. She registered the fact that I was not cowering in a coat room. She registered the very public, very imminent threat to her social standing. "Megan, what are you doing?" Patricia hissed, a harsh, frantic whisper that carried over the applause. She lunged from her chair. The heavy wooden legs scraped violently against the polished hardwood floor beneath the table. She reached out her manicured fingers, shaped into claws, attempting to grab my wrist and physically drag me back into the shadows. She wanted to pull me down, to silence me, to preserve the flawless illusion of her perfect family. I did not break my stride. I did not even look at her. I executed a smooth, effortless sidestep. Patricia's hand grasped empty air. Her momentum carried her forward, and she stumbled awkwardly in her designer heels, colliding with the edge of the adjacent table. Crystal glasses clinked dangerously as she scrambled to regain her balance, her face burning with sudden, furious humiliation. Several nearby investors turned to stare at her ungraceful display, but I was already moving past them. Bradley was seated at the next table, positioned beside Courtney. He had just raised a glass to his lips when he saw me marching down the aisle. He choked, coughing violently as the champagne caught in his throat. The smug, victorious smirk he had worn in the coat room dissolved into sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked at me, then looked frantically at Arthur Vance, the corporate fixer who was now sitting bolt upright, his face completely drained of color. Bradley frantically waved his hand, signaling the 2 heavy-set private security guards stationed at the base of the stage stairs. But the guards hesitated. They were trained to stop unruly drunk guests or aggressive crashers. They were not trained to intercept a woman in a high-end suit, walking with the absolute, unquestionable authority of an executive who owned the building. My demeanor threw them off. By the time they realized I was not part of the scheduled program, it was too late. I reached the base of the stairs and took them 2 at a time. My heels clicked sharply against the wooden risers, a rhythmic countdown to absolute destruction. Trayvon turned. He had just raised his hand to quiet the applause, his charismatic smile firmly in place. He saw me crest the top of the stairs, and the smile died on his face. The polished, untouchable facade cracked, revealing the panicked sociopath underneath. He took a hasty step backward, bumping hard into the large digital projection screen. "Get her off the stage," Trayvon barked, dropping the microphone to his side and gesturing wildly to the guards who were finally scrambling up the stairs behind me. I was faster. I crossed the stage in 3 long strides and reached the clear lucite podium. Trayvon reached out to shove me away, but I slammed my forearm into his chest, knocking him back a second time. Before security could react, I grabbed the secondary wired microphone resting in the stand on the podium and pulled it free. The ballroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Hundreds of wealthy investors stared up at the stage, entirely captivated by the sudden, unscripted drama. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the regional construction magnate. I saw the local dentist. I saw the people whose lives were about to be ruined by the man standing 3 feet away from me. Then I turned my head and looked dead into Trayvon's panicked eyes. Trayvon talks a lot about generational wealth, I said, my voice echoing like thunder through the massive concert speakers lining the walls. Let's look at exactly where your money is going. I pulled the silver USB drive from my pocket and plugged it directly into the podium's presentation laptop. The massive high-definition projector screen behind Trayvon flickered, emitting a low, sharp electronic hum. The gold-lettered Summit Ventures logo vanished. In its place, the stark, blinding white interface of my forensic auditing software illuminated the entire ballroom. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the intricate color-coded master spreadsheet populated the 50-foot display. It was a flawless, undeniable map of absolute financial ruin. I did not give Trayvon a single second to recover. I tapped the laptop's trackpad, navigating the cursor with practiced precision. The data expanded, filling the massive screen with unredacted names, international routing numbers, and offshore wire transfer receipts. Take a good look at the screen behind me, I commanded, my voice projecting crisp and unwavering through the venue's concert-grade sound system. You are looking at the master ledger of Apex Holdings, a dummy corporation registered in Delaware. It is operated entirely by the man standing next to me. He is not building generational wealth. He is running a localized Ponzi scheme, and you are funding his lifestyle. I highlighted a specific block of transactions in bright, damning yellow. The numbers were massive, glaring in the dim light of the ballroom. Let us trace the capital, I said, making eye contact with the crowd. To the gentleman at table 4, the owner of the regional construction firm. That $50,000 you wired last week for the downtown commercial expansion, it never went to a land acquisition trust. The timestamp on the screen shows it was routed directly through a cryptocurrency tumbler. 48 hours later, it landed in a Cayman Islands account to cover Trayvon's offshore gambling debts. The construction magnate at table 4 stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. His face drained of color as he stared at the 50-foot projection of his stolen funds. I clicked another file. The screen shifted smoothly, displaying a scanned vendor invoice side by side with a high-resolution photograph of a diamond necklace, and the $100,000 seed capital raised from the private dentistry practice at table 7. I continued the microphone, amplifying the cold, hard truth. That capital did not purchase medical real estate. Exactly $45,000 of that specific deposit was wired to a private jeweler in Manhattan. I turned and pointed directly at my sister, who was frozen in her chair at the VIP table. It bought the Cartier necklace my sister Courtney is wearing right now. Courtney let out a sharp, piercing shriek. Both of her hands flew up to her throat, desperately covering the diamonds, as if the stones had suddenly caught fire. The spotlight of the entire room shifted instantly from the stage to her. The polite whispers of the wealthy investors morphed into a low, dangerous rumble of realization. My mother Patricia sat paralyzed beside her. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her limp fingers and shattered against the polished hardwood floor, the expensive liquid soaking into the hem of her gown. At the adjacent table, Bradley's reaction was entirely different. He did not yell. He did not deny it. He simply shrank. The smug, victorious man who had cornered me in the cloakroom was gone. He looked at the massive screen, saw his own fraudulent vendor invoices displayed for hundreds of people to see, and went completely pale. Arthur Vance, the corporate fixer, did not even look at the stage. He simply snapped his leather briefcase shut, stood up, and began walking briskly toward the emergency exit at the back of the hall. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. Trayvon finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The charming visionary facade melted away completely, exposing the cornered, desperate fraudster beneath. The veins in his neck bulged, and his face turned a mottled, furious shade of red. "Turn that off!" he roared, his voice cracking without the amplification of the microphone. He lunged violently across the lucite podium. His hands clawed wildly at the laptop keyboard, knocking the presentation mouse onto the floor. He grabbed the side of the machine, desperately trying to physically rip the silver USB drive from the port. "Do not listen to a single word she is saying," Trayvon screamed, turning his manic, sweating face back to the audience. She is a crazy, bitter ex-employee. She is having a mental breakdown. This is a fabricated, malicious attack on my company. With a violent yank, Trayvon pulled the USB drive free. The massive projection screen behind us instantly went black, plunging the stage into darkness. But the damage was already done. The sudden darkness did not restore his authority. It only amplified the mounting panic in the room. Nobody was listening to Trevon's frantic, screaming excuses. I stepped back from the podium, smoothing the lapels of my tailored suit, completely unbothered by his physical outburst. The polite silence of the ballroom had been completely eradicated, replaced by a chaotic rising tide of genuine fear. I watched the local investors, the seasoned businessmen, and the wealthy retirees. They were not looking at Trayvon. They were not looking at the blank screen. They were looking down at their hands. All across the room, the soft blue glow of smartphone screens illuminated the panicked faces of Trayvon's victims. They were frantically logging into their banking portals, checking their private investment dashboards, and dialing their brokers. The low rumble of conversation escalated into shouts of pure panic. "My account is locked," a man in a tuxedo yelled from the back of the room, holding his phone up in the air. "The client portal is completely down." A woman near the front cried out, her voice trembling with hysteria. "The funds are gone. Everything is gone." The reality of the fraud had set in. The crowd began to turn on the VIP tables, their eyes locking onto Trayvon, Courtney, and Bradley. The trap had sprung, and there was no way out. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Trayvon stood frozen behind the clear, lucite podium, the unplugged USB drive clutched tightly in his shaking fist. He had severed the connection, plunging the massive projection screen back into darkness, but the darkness offered him no protection. The damage was catastrophic and irreversible. All around us, the wealthy elite of the city were rising from their velvet-draped tables. The polite, sophisticated murmurs of a high society gala had vanished entirely, replaced by the hostile, aggressive shouts of a localized financial panic. Men in bespoke tuxedos were waving their smartphones in the air, their screens displaying locked investment portals and zeroed-out offshore balances. Women were pointing directly at the stage, their voices shrill with outrage as they demanded their money back. The two heavy-set private security guards at the base of the stairs took one look at the furious, surging crowd, then looked back at Trayvon. They exchanged a brief, knowing glance. Realizing their paychecks were tied to a fraudulent account that had just been exposed to hundreds of people, they simply stepped backward, crossed their arms, and refused to intervene. Trayvon was completely on his own. He realized this a second later. The charismatic visionary leader evaporated, leaving behind a cornered, desperate con artist. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face slick with a cold sweat. "Do not listen to her," Trayvon screamed, his voice cracking violently, without the amplification of the microphone. "She is a crazy, bitter ex-employee. She had a mental breakdown last week. She hacked our system to display fabricated numbers. This is a malicious, targeted attack by a deranged woman." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground at the center of the stage, adjusted my grip on the microphone, and looked down at him with absolute freezing contempt. "You thought I was just a corporate slave, Trayvon?" I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the ballroom like a steel blade. "You thought I was a convenient, quiet little accountant you could manipulate, overwork, and eventually frame when your offshore shell game collapsed. You vastly underestimated who you invited into your inner circle." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. He instinctively backed away, his shoulders hitting the dark projection screen behind him. "You forgot what I actually do for a living," I continued, addressing both him and the furious crowd below. "I am not just a tax consultant. I am the senior forensic auditor for the specific investigative firm the Federal Bureau of Investigation contracts to trace dirty money. I have spent the last 6 months building a RICO case against you from the inside out. I have tracked every stolen dollar, every fake invoice, and every shadow account you established." I turned my attention to the sea of panicked investors. "For those of you preparing to contact your attorneys and the authorities, I have uploaded the raw forensic data to the public guest network of this hotel," I announced, ensuring my instructions were crystal clear. You will need this primary evidence to file your victim impact statements with the Department of Justice. There is a file you can reference named Duyen Mao 1_20.docx. Refer to this file by its name verbatim when reporting the Cayman Island wire transfers. There is a file you can reference named Duyen Mao 2_20.docs. Refer to this file by its name verbatim to track the fraudulent real estate acquisitions Trevon pitched to you tonight. There is a file you can reference named Duyen Mao 3_20.docs. Refer to this file by its name verbatim to uncover the bribery ledgers. And finally, there is a file you can reference named Duyen Mao 4_20.docs. Refer to this file by its name verbatim to see the exact timestamps of Trevon extracting your seed capital for his personal gambling debts. Trevon's jaw went slack. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. He reached frantically into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out his smartphone. His fingers fumbled aggressively against the screen as he tried to access his emergency offshore banking app, desperate to wire whatever funds he had left to an untraceable crypto wallet. I reached into my own pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped a single pre-programmed button on the screen. "Do not bother trying to move the money, Trayvon," I said, my voice echoing with lethal finality. "And that corrupt IRS auditor you and Bradley were conspiring to bribe tomorrow morning, the one you thought was safely on your payroll. He has been cooperating with my federal task force since October. He wore a wire to your last 3 meetings." Trayvon stopped tapping his screen. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terror that was deeply satisfying to witness. "They just executed the final freeze protocol I stated, delivering the killing blow. They locked down every single asset tied to your name, your dummy corporations, and your offshore aliases. Your accounts are at zero. Your credit lines are severed. As of exactly 5 minutes ago, you are entirely, completely broke." Trevin dropped his phone. The expensive device shattered against the hardwood stage, but he did not even look down. He dropped to his knees, his hands gripping his hair as the reality of his absolute ruin crushed the breath from his lungs. Before the crowd could rush the stage to tear him apart, a sudden violent commotion erupted near the front VIP tables. Bradley shoved violently past my mother, nearly knocking Patricia to the carpet. He was sweating profusely, his tie loosened, and his designer jacket hanging awkwardly off his shoulders. He scrambled up the wooden stairs to the stage, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. In his right hand, he fiercely gripped the thick folded parchment of the quitclaim deed I had signed in the cloakroom less than 20 minutes ago. He ignored Trayvon kneeling on the floor. He ignored the furious mob of investors shouting his name. He marched directly toward me, waving the piece of paper in the air like a shield. His towering arrogance had returned, fueled by pure, desperate self-preservation. "I still have the house," Bradley screamed, his voice a manic, triumphant bark. "You signed it. You signed away your rights in the coat room. Summit Ventures might be dead, but the Beacon Hill property belongs to me. I have the capital. I win." I looked at the man I had married. I looked at the coward who had tried to steal my life, my money, and my sanity. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply looked at him with dead, empty eyes. "I signed it, Brad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp whisper that carried perfectly through the microphone. "I gave you the deed. I gave you exactly what you begged for. But you forgot to check the public registry this morning." Bradley froze. The manic smile on his face faltered, his arms slowly lowering, as a new, profound dread settled into his bones. "The FBI executed a federal asset forfeiture warrant before the banks even opened." I continued, stepping directly into his personal space. "They seized the Beacon Hill property at exactly 8 a.m. It is no longer a residential home. It is an active, restricted federal crime scene." I watched his eyes drop to the piece of paper in his hand. The parchment trembled violently as the realization finally hit him. "Congratulations, Brad," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "You do not own a mansion. You just signed your name to 50% of a federal investigation." The heavy parchment slipped from Bradley's trembling fingers. It fluttered through the air, landing uselessly on the polished floorboards of the stage. Before he could even process the magnitude of his absolute ruin, a sound like a thunderclap shattered the remaining noise in the ballroom. The massive solid oak double doors at the back of the hall burst inward with explosive force. The brass hinges shrieked and snapped, sending splinters of wood flying across the plush entryway carpet. FBI, nobody move. Keep your hands exactly where we can see them. A wave of federal agents in heavy tactical gear swarmed into the room. The sudden overwhelming presence of black body armor, Kevlar vests, and drawn weapons instantly turned the opulent gala into a chaotic war zone. The high society guests erupted into pure panic. Wealthy socialites screamed, dropping crystal champagne flutes that shattered into thousands of glittering shards across the floor. Prominent businessmen scrambled backward, knocking over velvet-draped tables and diving behind floral centerpieces in sheer terror. Red and blue strobe lights from the tactical vehicles outside began flashing violently through the tall ballroom windows, casting harsh, moving shadows over the terrified crowd. Agent Reynolds led the charge down the center aisle, his badge held high, his eyes locked dead on the stage. Trevin's survival instinct finally kicked in. He scrambled up from the floor, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping wildly against the polished wood. He cast a frantic, terrified glance toward the secondary exit behind the velvet curtains, but it was already too late. Two tactical agents launched themselves onto the stage. They hit Trevon with the force of a freight train. The sickening hollow thud of his impact echoed through the microphone still resting on the podium. Trayvon hit the ground hard, his expensive custom suit instantly wrinkling and tearing as the agents pinned him down. "Get off me! Do you know who my lawyers are? I know the mayor!" Trayvon screamed, spitting blood and saliva onto the floorboards as he thrashed helplessly against the immense weight of the federal agents. "Stop resisting," an agent barked, driving a knee sharply into the small of Trayvon's back. He wrenched Trayvon's arms backward with ruthless efficiency. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around Trayvon's wrists was the final definitive sound of his empire collapsing. The visionary financial guru was gone, replaced by a pathetic, desperate criminal, sobbing into the dust of his own stage. Bradley watched his business partner get brutalized by federal agents. The last remaining ounce of his towering, unchecked arrogance completely evaporated. He fell to his knees, the impact echoing dully over the chaos of the room. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and brimming with unchecked tears. His chest heaved with violent, uncontrollable sobs. He was entirely broken. He reached out with a trembling, sweaty hand and grabbed the hem of my midnight blue designer suit. "Megan, please." Bradley begged, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that cut through the noise of the raid. "Tell them it is a mistake. I am your husband. You cannot do this to me. I will give the house back. I will give it all back. Just tell them to stop." I looked down at the man who had spent months gaslighting me, manipulating me, and attempting to steal the life I had built with my own hands. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no pity. There was no hesitation. I simply pulled my leg backward, the smooth silk of my suit slipping effortlessly from his sweaty grasp. I stepped over him without a single word. Agent Reynolds reached the top of the stairs. He grabbed Bradley by the collar of his expensive custom-tailored jacket and hauled him roughly to his feet. He slammed Bradley face first against the clear lucite podium, knocking the wind completely out of him. "Bradley Blackwood," Agent Reynolds stated, his voice ringing with cold, unyielding authority as he slapped the heavy steel cuffs onto his wrists. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, international money laundering, and extortion. You have the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you use right now." Down on the main floor, the perimeter had been fully secured. Federal agents were moving through the VIP section, checking identifications and locking down the primary suspects. At table 1, Courtney was losing her mind. She backed away from her overturned chair, her eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for a way out that did not exist. The glamorous, untouchable socialite facade had been completely ripped away. She was cornered, hyperventilating, and entirely exposed to the very people she had spent years trying to impress. A stern, broad-shouldered female agent stepped directly into Courtney's path, cutting off her only route to the side exit. Courtney shrieked, taking a panicked step backward. She held her hands up defensively, her massive diamond engagement ring flashing in the harsh tactical lights. "Do not touch me!" Courtney screamed, her voice shrill and echoing with absolute hysteria. "Do you have any idea who I am? My husband is Trayvon Vance. I have nothing to do with his business. I am a victim here. You are traumatizing me." The female agent did not blink. She did not hesitate. She stepped firmly into Courtney's personal space, entirely ignoring the frantic waving hands. The agent reached around Courtney's neck with surgical precision. Her gloved fingers found the clasp of the heavy $45,000 Cartier diamond necklace resting against Courtney's collarbone. With a swift, practiced motion, the agent unclasped the jewelry and pulled it free. "Hey, that is mine. You cannot take that," Courtney screeched, lunging forward to grab the diamonds back. The agent easily sidestepped her, holding the glittering necklace up in the air out of reach. She pulled a clear, heavy-duty plastic evidence bag from her tactical vest and dropped the diamonds inside. She sealed the bag shut with a loud, sharp zip that finalized the transaction. "Evidence of federal identity theft and wire fraud," the agent stated flatly, her voice completely devoid of emotion. She grabbed Courtney by the shoulder and spun her around forcefully. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Mrs. Vance. You are under arrest." Courtney wailed a loud, ugly sound of pure defeat as the cold steel locked around her wrists. She was forcefully marched through the crowded ballroom, her head bowed in ultimate disgrace, as the investors she had viewed as beneath her watched her walk out in chains. I walked slowly down the wooden steps of the stage, leaving Bradley and Trayvon pinned behind me. The sea of panicked investors and federal agents naturally parted, giving me a wide, clear path. I spotted my mother Patricia cowering near a velvet curtain. She was trying desperately to blend in with the innocent bystanders shrinking away from her arrested daughter and her humiliated son-in-law. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and the terrifying reality of losing her precious social standing was written plainly across her pale face. She caught my eye as I walked past. She expected me to stop. She expected me to offer a lifeline to protect the family name one last time. I did not even break my stride. I walked directly past her, moving smoothly toward the front exit, leaving the burning ruins of Summit Ventures entirely behind me. The heavy glass doors of the grand lobby stood 10 feet away, offering a clear path to the cool, rain-slicked pavement outside. Behind me, the ballroom had devolved into a cacophony of federal orders, clinking handcuffs, and the shrill, frantic protests of the city's ruined elite. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my heels striking the marble floor with steady, rhythmic precision. I was almost to the exit when the desperate, scrambling sound of leather shoes slapping against the polished stone echoed behind me. "Megan, wait. Stop right there." The voice belonged to my father, Richard. It lacked the booming, unyielding authority he had wielded over me since childhood. Tonight it was fractured, breathless, and laced with absolute terror. I paused, slowly turning around. Patricia and Richard were rushing across the lobby, practically tripping over themselves to reach me. The transformation they had undergone in the last 10 minutes was staggering. My father's bespoke tuxedo jacket was violently rumpled, his silk bow tie hanging loosely around his neck. My mother looked entirely unhinged. The perfectly manicured high society matriarch who had mocked my career choices over a crystal flute of champagne was completely gone. Her expensive updo was fraying, and a streak of mascara ran down her pale, panicked face. They had just watched their golden child Courtney get physically stripped of her stolen diamonds and hauled away in federal cuffs. They had watched their prized son-in-law shoved face first into the floorboards. Their entire social and financial ecosystem had just been vaporized on a 50-foot projection screen. Now the cornered rats were desperately searching for a lifeline. Patricia reached me first. She threw her arms out, lunging forward in a frantic attempt to pull me into a tight maternal hug. It was a gesture of affection she had not freely offered me in over a decade, deployed now only as a mechanism of survival. I stepped back smoothly, letting her arms grasp at empty air. Patricia stumbled, quickly catching her balance before forcing a wide, trembling smile onto her face. She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, attempting to instantly rewrite the reality of the last 30 years. "Oh my God, Megan! You saved us!" Patricia gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, as if she were overwhelmed with gratitude. "We had no idea they were doing this to you. We thought Trayvon was running a legitimate enterprise. If we had known he was using your name for those awful shell companies, your father and I would have stopped him immediately. You have to believe us." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer unadulterated delusion it took to construct a lie that transparent. Richard stepped forward, attempting to flank me, falling right back into his role as the commanding patriarch, fixing a family crisis. "Listen to me, Megan. Trevin is a criminal, and he deserves whatever the federal government gives him," Richard stated, his voice dropping to a harsh conspiratorial whisper. "But your sister is innocent in all of this. Courtney does not understand finance. She just likes nice things. She had no idea that necklace was bought with stolen seed capital. You have to go back in there and tell your FBI friends to let her go." I folded my arms across my chest, the midnight blue silk of my blazer catching the red and blue strobe lights flashing through the lobby windows. "You want me to tell the federal agents that Courtney is innocent?" I repeated, keeping my tone deadly flat. "Yes," Patricia pleaded, clasping her hands together. "Please, Megan. You are the senior auditor. They will listen to you. You have to help us post bail for Courtney. She didn't know. She is too fragile for a holding cell. You know how she gets when she is stressed. She will not survive the night in a federal facility." They were doing it again. Even now, standing in the wreckage of a massive racketeering bust, their only instinct was to protect Courtney from the consequences of her own actions. They expected me, the daughter they had spent a lifetime degrading, to lay down on the tracks to shield the golden child. I looked past them. Through the open ballroom doors, I could see two agents marching Courtney toward the secondary exit. She was weeping loudly, her mascara staining her silk dress, her wrists firmly bound behind her back in heavy steel cuffs. I brought my gaze back to my parents. The disgust rolling through my veins was absolute and completely paralyzing to them. "You are lying," I said, my voice cutting through their manufactured panic with absolute precision. "You are both lying, and you are not even good at it anymore." Richard puffed out his chest, his face flushing with defensive anger. "How dare you speak to us that way? We are your parents. We are the victims here. Trayvon lied to us too." "Trayvon did not lie to you, Dad," I countered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to back away. "You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You have been quietly funneling your own underwater real estate assets through Summit Ventures for the past 8 months. You used Trayvon's offshore tumbler to avoid paying capital gains taxes on the Southside commercial properties. I saw the routing numbers. I tracked the deposits directly into your private wealth management account." Richard's jaw dropped. The defensive anger vanished, replaced by the hollow, sickening realization that I had seen everything. "And you, Mom?" I continued, turning my lethal focus onto Patricia. "You knew Courtney was spending stolen capital. You sat at my dining room table 3 weeks ago and told me to sign over the Beacon Hill house to Trayvon. You told me it was my duty to support the family, to—" Patricia shook her head violently, her eyes darting around the lobby to ensure none of the lingering socialites were listening. "Megan, please keep your voice down. We were just trying to keep the family together. We thought you were being unreasonable." "You knew exactly what they were doing," I stated, delivering the words with cold, calculated finality. "When I pushed back, you threatened to lie about my mental health to protect them. You told me you would testify that I was having a psychotic break, so Trayvon could take power of attorney over my assets. We never meant that." Patricia sobbed, reaching out again. "We were just trying to protect your sister. We had to protect Courtney." "Well, you failed," I replied, completely unaffected by her tears. "Courtney is going to a federal holding facility, and Trayvon is looking at 20 years for wire fraud." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, tapping the illuminated screen to check the time. I looked back up at my parents, offering them a sharp, merciless smile. "And you should really stop worrying about Courtney's bail money," I added, my voice ringing with total authority. "You are not going to have access to those funds anyway." Richard swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. "What are you talking about?" "The FBI has a warrant for your financial records too," I said, watching the last shreds of their elite status burn to ash. The tactical team is executing a search warrant on your primary residence right now. They are seizing the computers, the offshore ledgers, and the bank accounts tied to the Southside property sales. Enjoy the audit, Mom. I did not wait for their response. I turned on my heel, pushing open the heavy glass doors, and walked out into the cool driving rain, leaving my parents to face the absolute destruction of the empire they had tried to build on my back. Exactly 1 month later, the freezing rain of that chaotic night felt like a distant memory. I sat in a high-backed leather chair on the 42nd floor of a sleek, glass-walled attorney's office overlooking the Boston Harbor. The morning sun reflected off the dark water, casting bright geometric patterns across the polished mahogany conference table. The room was perfectly silent, insulated from the noise of the city below. It was a stark, peaceful contrast to the absolute wreckage I had left behind in that hotel lobby. Sitting to my right was David, the lead federal prosecutor assigned to the Summit Ventures racketeering case. He was reviewing a thick, heavily redacted case file, tapping his expensive fountain pen against the rim of his coffee mug. He closed the folder with a satisfying thud, leaned back in his chair, and gave me the latest updates. Trevon Vance was currently sitting in a maximum security federal holding facility. His high-priced defense attorneys had fought viciously for his release, arguing that he was a respected businessman who deserved house arrest. The federal judge had taken exactly one look at the offshore wire transfers I had provided, noted his multiple fake aliases, and declared him an extreme flight risk. Bail was permanently and immediately denied. The charismatic mastermind who loved the sound of his own voice was now wearing an orange jumpsuit, entirely stripped of his power, his audience, and his freedom. He was facing multiple federal indictments that would keep him locked away for the rest of his natural life. Bradley had folded faster than anyone in the Justice Department had anticipated. The moment the FBI sat him down in a sterile interrogation room and presented him with the 50-foot spreadsheet I had displayed at the gala, his towering arrogance completely shattered. He did not ask for a lawyer right away. He did not try to fight. Facing a guaranteed 20-year sentence in federal prison for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and international money laundering, the coward took the very first plea deal the prosecutors slid across the metal table. Bradley signed a full, unredacted confession. He detailed every single aspect of the localized Ponzi scheme, throwing Trevon Arthur and my parents completely under the bus in exchange for a reduced sentence of 10 years. He traded his luxury lifestyle for a decade behind bars, and according to the official transcript David showed me, he did it sobbing uncontrollably, begging the agents to believe that he had been manipulated by everyone around him. My parents were not faring much better. The FBI audit I had triggered froze Patricia and Richard's assets overnight. Their country club memberships were revoked, their credit cards declined, and their social standing in the city was instantly annihilated. They were currently trapped in a grueling, merciless federal investigation regarding the Southside property sales and their attempts to evade capital gains taxes through Trevon's shell companies. Courtney was wearing a government-issued ankle monitor in a tiny rented apartment facing her own accessory and possession of stolen property charges. The golden child was finally experiencing the real world, and she was experiencing it entirely alone. It was a beautiful, poetic irony. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had banded together to steal my home, drain my bank accounts, and question my sanity. Instead, their blinding greed had handed me the keys to their complete destruction. Across the polished mahogany desk sat Special Agent Thomas from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He wore a crisp, immaculate charcoal suit and looked at me with a mixture of profound professional respect and genuine awe. He adjusted his glasses, clasped his hands together, and leaned forward. "Megan, what you handed us was not just an anonymous tip," Agent Thomas said, his voice carrying the quiet weight of federal authority. "You handed us a fully prosecuted case, tied up with a neat little bow. You did not just expose a fraud. You systematically dismantled a $15 million international crime ring from the inside out. Your forensic tracing documents were absolutely flawless." I offered a small, polite nod, letting him continue. "Because of your exact timestamps, your routing numbers, and the backdoor algorithms you coded, Our cyber units were able to freeze the crypto tumblers before a single digital coin could be scrubbed, Agent Thomas explained, referencing a yellow legal pad in front of him. We recovered every single cent Trevon Vance attempted to hide in the Cayman Islands. We secured the real estate deeds. We seized the luxury vehicles. We recovered the seed capital stolen from those local investors. It is one of the cleanest, most comprehensive asset recoveries this division has ever seen in a single sweep. The Federal Bureau of Investigation handles the criminal charges and the prison sentences. Agent Thomas continued unzipping a slim black leather portfolio resting on his desk. But the Internal Revenue Service handles the financial recovery and the tax fraud. And we have a very specific, heavily mandated protocol for individuals who provide actionable primary evidence leading to the collection of stolen tax revenue and fraudulent capital. He opened the portfolio. Inside sat a single piece of heavy stock paper printed with the unmistakable seal of the United States Treasury. It is called the IRS Whistleblower Reward Program. He stated, his voice steady and formal. He placed his index finger on the edge of the crisp paper. With a slow, deliberate motion, he slid it across the smooth expanse of the mahogany desk until it rested directly in front of me. The morning sunlight caught the security watermark pressed into the paper. Under the law, you are entitled to 15% to 30% of the recovered proceeds, Agent Thomas said, watching my face closely. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I simply looked down at the desk, feeling a profound, absolute sense of justice settle into my chest. Resting against the polished wood was an official certified treasury check. I stared at the bold, dark numbers printed across the center line, verifying the exact amount. It was made out to me for $3.5 million. The crisp autumn air filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse carried the faint, rhythmic hum of the city below. I stood at the marble kitchen island, sipping black coffee from a ceramic mug, watching the morning light catch the edge of the financial documents spread across the counter. The transition of $3.5 million into my private accounts had been seamless. It was the ultimate undeniable proof of my vindication, but the true reward was the profound, unbroken silence that now filled my life. The federal indictments had torn through my family with the destructive force of a Category 5 hurricane. Trevon and Bradley were locked away, but the blast radius of their localized Ponzi scheme did not stop at the prison gates. It obliterated everything my parents and my sister held dear. Courtney was entirely bankrupt. The federal asset forfeiture protocols had been merciless. Because she had knowingly benefited from stolen funds, the Department of Justice seized absolutely everything. They took the leased luxury penthouse. They impounded the imported sports cars. Federal agents literally walked into her custom walk-in closet and confiscated the designer handbags, the shoes, and the jewelry, tagging it all as proceeds of criminal racketeering. Stripped of her stolen wealth and her fraudulent status, Courtney was forced to face the real world for the very first time in her life. The high society friends who used to drink her champagne and attend her lavish brunches completely ghosted her the moment the FBI raided the gala. She was a social pariah, entirely radioactive. With no savings, no degree, and no practical skills, Courtney faced a brutal reality check. According to the employment verification forms submitted to the bankruptcy court, the former golden child of the family was now working 35 hours a week at a discount home goods store. She was scanning barcodes, folding cheap polyester towels, and wearing a stiff, unflattering uniform name tag just to make enough money to rent a tiny, damp room in a shared apartment. The woman who once mocked my career as corporate slavery was now entirely dependent on minimum wage just to survive. My parents fared no better. When Trevon's accounts were frozen, the immense financial burden of his federal defense fell squarely onto Patricia and Richard. Trevon and Courtney demanded the best legal representation money could buy, and my parents, blinded by their pathological need to protect their golden child, gave them exactly that. They drained their retirement accounts, they liquidated their legitimate stock portfolios. But high-powered federal defense attorneys charge exorbitant retainers, and the money dried up fast. In a final desperate attempt to save face and keep Courtney out of federal prison, Patricia and Richard made the ultimate sacrifice. They sold the family estate. The sprawling, immaculate home where I had spent my entire life being treated like a second-class citizen was auctioned off to cover legal fees. It was a spectacular, humiliating downfall. The Beacon Hill elite watched with morbid fascination as the moving trucks hauled away my mother's prized antique furniture. Their country club membership was revoked due to unpaid dues. The social circle they had worshipped for decades slammed their doors shut, refusing to associate with the parents of convicted fraudsters. Patricia and Richard were reduced to renting a modest, outdated townhouse on the outskirts of the city, their social ruin absolute and permanent. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop, vibrating loudly in the quiet kitchen. The caller ID flashed a number I had not seen in 30 days. It was Patricia. I did not answer. I simply watched the screen glow until the call rolled over to the automated system. A minute later, a small red notification appeared. She had left a voicemail. I set my coffee mug down. I tapped the screen, pressed the speaker icon, and let the audio fill the sunlit room. "Megan, please pick up." My mother's voice was completely unrecognizable. The sharp, condescending tone she had weaponized against me my entire life was entirely gone. She sounded ragged, breathless, and broken. She was sobbing a wet, ugly sound that she would never have allowed anyone to hear in her previous life. "We have nothing left, Megan," Patricia cried, her voice cracking violently. "The lawyers took everything. They took the house. Your father's heart is failing from the stress. We are sleeping on an air mattress in a terrible rental, and the landlord is threatening to evict us because Richard's credit is destroyed." I leaned against the counter, listening to the desperate, frantic breathing on the other end of the line. "I know about the whistleblower reward," Patricia continued, her sobs hitching in her throat. "I saw the court filings. You are rich now, Megan. You have more money than you could ever need. We are your parents. We raised you. Please, I am begging you, just wire us enough for a deposit on a decent apartment. Just a small loan to help us survive the winter. Please, family helps family." The voicemail ended with a sharp electronic click. I stood in the silence of my penthouse, letting the profound hypocrisy of her final sentence wash over me. Family helps family. She dared to invoke the concept of family only after she had exhausted every other option. When I was drowning in their emotional abuse, family meant blind obedience. When Traven was stealing my identity, family meant looking the other way. Now that I was a multimillionaire, and they were destitute family, suddenly meant financial rescue. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt exactly what I was meant to feel. Absolute closure. I tapped the screen of my phone. I swiped left on the voicemail and hit the delete button. The audio file vanished forever. I opened her contact profile, scrolled to the very bottom, and selected block caller. I did the exact same thing for Richard and Courtney, permanently severing their access to my life with 3 simple taps on a glass screen. I placed the phone back on the counter and turned toward the bedroom. Resting on the plush duvet was an open, brand-new designer suitcase. I neatly folded a silk evening gown and tucked it inside, preparing for a month-long vacation to the Amalfi Coast. I was leaving the country, leaving the past, and leaving them exactly where they belonged. Behind me. The sleek black town car glided to a smooth halt in front of the International Departure Terminal. A uniformed chauffeur immediately stepped out, opening my door with a respectful nod. I stepped onto the pavement, the cool evening breeze catching the edge of my tailored trench coat. There was no scrambling for luggage, no frantic checking of boarding passes, and no managing the manufactured crises of the people around me. The chauffeur retrieved my single midnight blue designer suitcase from the trunk and handed it to a waiting airline concierge. For the past 3 decades, every family vacation or holiday trip had been a suffocating exercise in logistics and financial drain. I was always the one tasked with booking the flights, securing the upgrades, and paying the exorbitant excess baggage fees for Courtney's endless wardrobe changes. I was the one who managed Richard's demanding schedules and Patricia's complaints about the service. I had carried their emotional baggage right alongside their physical luggage, acting as a human shield for their entitlement, while they treated me like an unpaid assistant. Tonight I was carrying absolutely nothing. I bypassed the chaotic winding lines of the main ticketing hall. The concierge guided me through a discreet frosted glass door marked for priority international travelers. The security screening was swift and entirely private, devoid of the usual airport friction. Within 10 minutes of stepping out of the town car, I was walking down the plush carpeted corridor leading to the flagship first-class lounge. The heavy oak doors parted, revealing a sanctuary of quiet luxury. The lounge was expansive, featuring soaring ceilings, warm ambient lighting, and panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed view of the active tarmac. The frantic, high-pitched energy of the main terminal was completely sealed away. Here the air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh orchids, and the only sounds were the soft clinking of crystal and the hushed, polite conversations of fellow travelers. I chose a high-backed velvet armchair, situated directly against the massive glass wall. The city lights sparkled in the distance, a glittering backdrop to the massive jetliners taxiing into position. A sharply dressed lounge attendant appeared almost instantly at my side, offering a warm, professional smile. "I will have a glass of the vintage champagne," I requested, settling deep into the velvet cushions. As the attendant glided away to fulfill the order, I let myself sink into the profound, absolute silence of my new reality. My phone, resting face down on the small marble table beside me, was completely silent. There were no panicked text messages from my mother. There were no demands for wire transfers from Trayvon. There were no passive-aggressive complaints from Courtney. The toxic parasitic ecosystem that had defined my entire existence had been utterly and permanently eradicated. My original itinerary had me flying directly to the Amalfi Coast, but ultimate financial freedom brings the absolute luxury of spontaneity. I had rerouted my flight that very morning simply because I woke up wanting to see the Eiffel Tower. The attendant returned, placing a crystal flute of pale golden champagne on the table. The bubbles rose in a perfect steady stream. I picked up the glass, the cool crystal grounding me in the present moment, and took a slow, deliberate sip. As I watched a massive commercial jet roar down the runway and lift into the night sky, my mind drifted to the people I was leaving behind in the dirt. It was currently 8 o'clock in the evening. I knew exactly where they all were. Courtney was currently clocking into her night shift. The woman who had once stood in my foyer, draped in stolen diamonds, was now wearing a stiff polyester uniform, spending her evenings standing behind a fluorescent-lit register. Without Trayvon's stolen capital to fund her delusions, she had been brutally evicted from her luxury rental. She was learning the value of $1 the hardest way possible, working minimum wage just to afford a damp, cramped room in a part of the city she used to mock. Patricia and Richard were sitting in a cheap, outdated townhouse staring at the walls. They had liquidated their entire legitimate fortune to pay for high-powered defense attorneys trading their Beacon Hill mansion for a desperate attempt to keep their golden child out of a federal penitentiary. They were socially exiled, financially ruined, and completely isolated. The empire they had tried to build by sacrificing my sanity and my assets had crumbled to ash. And Trayvon Vance was sitting in a cinderblock cell in a federal holding facility. The charismatic mastermind was wearing an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, waiting for the harsh reality of a 20-year sentence to begin. His offshore accounts were frozen. His shell companies were dismantled. His voice, which he had used to manipulate everyone around him, was now completely powerless. Meanwhile, $3.5 million sat securely in my private wealth management accounts, earning interest by the minute. It was a tangible, undeniable testament to my survival. I had not just survived their attempts to destroy me, I had weaponized their greed and used it to secure my absolute freedom. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The voice was smooth, deep, and polite. I turned my head away from the window. A handsome man in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit was gesturing to the leather chair across the small marble table. He had dark, intelligent eyes and carried a sleek leather briefcase. He projected an aura of quiet confidence, someone completely comfortable in this world of high-altitude luxury. "It is all yours," I replied smoothly. He sat down, placing his briefcase on the floor. He ordered a bourbon neat from a passing attendant, then leaned back and looked at me. His gaze was respectful, but undeniably intrigued. He noticed the posture, the calm, and the absolute absence of anxiety that now radiated from me. Heading somewhere special, he asked, offering a warm, engaging smile. I looked back out the massive glass windows. Another plane was lifting off the tarmac, cutting through the dark clouds, ascending higher and higher, until it was nothing but a blinking light among the stars. I thought about the heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation that had dragged me down for 30 years. I thought about the desperate, frantic people scrambling in the ruins of their own making. And then I thought about the bright, limitless expanse of the rest of my life. I turned back to the handsome businessman, offering him a sharp, brilliant smile that was entirely my own. Paris. I answered, my voice ringing calm, clear, and completely free. And for the first time in my life, I am traveling extremely light. True independence comes from valuing your own worth over toxic familial expectations. Megan's journey illustrates that blood does not automatically grant someone the right to your peace or prosperity. By stripping away the financial and emotional control her parents and sister wielded, she discovered that real freedom requires walking away from those who only see you as a resource. It is a powerful reminder that we must protect our well-being and define success on our own terms, rather than sacrificing our sanity to maintain a damaging facade. Share your own experience about cutting ties to protect your peace in the comments below.